Jean-Jacques Rousseau was one of the most influential thinkers of the Enlightenment era. Born in 1712 in Geneva, his life unfolded during a turbulent period of history marked by significant social changes and new intellectual movements that challenged long-held beliefs. The Enlightenment represented a major paradigm shift, with great minds applying reason, scientific inquiry, and new philosophies to better understand humanity, society, nature, and existence. Rousseau was at the forefront of this intellectual upheaval, critiquing traditional thought and developing groundbreaking ideas that shaped the fields of education, political philosophy, and our understanding of human nature. To appreciate the originality in Rousseau's work, it is helpful to understand the environment in which he was writing. 18th century Europe was still predominantly under the authority of absolute monarchies, where rulers derived power through lineage rather than the consent of the governed. Long-held customs and hierarchies organized society. The Catholic Church and Scripture held substantial influence over the public and intellectual thought. It was in this highly structured world that Enlightenment thinkers would challenge the status quo with new theories based on reason, science, and humanism. They questioned the divine right of absolute rulers, existing power structures, rigid institutions, and suppression of free thought. Rousseau would contribute significantly to this intellectual shift. One of Rousseau's most influential meditations was his conception of the hypothetical state of nature, an imagined early state of humankind before the creation of civilization. This aligned with Enlightenment thought experiments using speculation and reason to reconstruct how society may have arisen from a primitive origin. Rousseau's state of nature posited early humans existing solitary lives, providing for themselves and interacting peacefully with one another. Devoid of the corrupting forces of society, he viewed humanity in its natural state as inherently good, happy, and unconstrained. Rousseau mused that in this idyllic setting, humans enjoyed their greatest freedom, living in harmony with their own nature and the world around them. Apart from basic survival, people's lives in the pure state of nature were simple and content. While hypothetical, Rousseau's thought exercise was foundational to his theories. The state of nature represented human potential in an untarnished form. It suggested that vice, greed, and conflict arose not intrinsically from human nature, but as a result of societal factors. This would inform his views on education, governance, and social inequality. Expanding on this theoretical origin story, Rousseau went on to explain the formation of organized society through his influential social contract theory. As life outside the state of nature became more complex, Rousseau posited that individuals came together and agreed to collectively create a civil society. People voluntarily entered into a symbolic social contract and consented to be governed by laws and leaders they determined would serve the common good. Rousseau argued that this contract was the only legitimate form of governance. It required leaders to act in accordance with the general will of the people rather than their own self-interest. Power was to be derived from the unified will of the members of society. Rousseau's social contract model was a radical departure from the doctrine of the divine right of kings that dominated during his time. His ideas would go on to directly influence modern representative democracies, laying groundwork for governance by the consent of the governed and through leaders representing the people's will. Connected to his notions of the state of nature and the social contract was Rousseau's perspective on human nature itself. In a departure from the Christian doctrine of original sin, Rousseau believed that humans in their natural state were fundamentally good. Vice, greed, and immorality he viewed not as innate to humanity, but rather as the result of the corrupting influence of society's conditions. This perspective shaped his educational philosophy and view on society. Rousseau argued that rather than battle against natural human instincts, the ideal society should remove corrupting cultural influences and instead build upon the inherent virtuous qualities present within people. For Rousseau, the goal was to create conditions where humanity's naturally good dispositions could thrive unencumbered by artificial constraints. This positive view of human nature was in stark contrast to more pessimistic philosophies of man that emphasized vice and immorality as innate elements. Building on his views of human nature, Rousseau advocated an educational model designed to allow children's natural abilities to foster and unfold without the typical constraints and power structures imposed by society. In his work Unveiled, Rousseau emphasized education that aligned with students' innate talents and proclivities. This approach rejected regimented curricula built upon rigid expectations, punishment, and reward systems. Rousseau viewed such traditional models as stifling students' natural curiosities. Instead, he favored minimal intervention to permit the child's inherent qualities to develop freely. The role of the teacher was to subtly guide rather than impose external methodologies. Rousseau believed such an upbringing enabled individuals to fulfill their latent potential, nurture their nascent capacities, and grow into virtuous adults according to their own inner nature rather than outward societal mandates. His child-centered educational model would profoundly influence modern educational philosophy. While acknowledging humanity had progressed greatly through reason, science, and philosophy, Rousseau also issued sharp critiques of modern civilization and its distance from our natural origins. In The State of Nature, Rousseau saw humanity unencumbered and able to act according to innate proclivities, driven by self-preservation and rudimentary needs. He viewed this as aligning most closely with human nature. In contrast, Rousseau regarded modern society's complex rules, structures, institutions, and expectations as exerting artificial constraints upon people's natural condition. He lamented how entrenched power dynamics curtailed the freedoms humans enjoyed in their earlier state. In his discourse on inequality, Rousseau traces the development of language, agriculture, private property, and metallurgy as seminal events that catalyzed humanity's departure from its original existence. While enabling progress, these innovations also led to inequality, vice, and power imbalances, according to Rousseau's analysis. Through this lens, Rousseau raises profound questions regarding whether the comforts of civilization truly compensate for or eclipse the essential human virtues innate to our natural condition. While Rousseau's philosophical writings were often theoretical or speculative, his radical ideas pressed at the time still carry resonance today and can inform examinations of modern society. For example, Rousseau's conception of an ideal society built around the general will of the population accords with notions of responsible, representative governance that serves all citizens equitably. His emphasis on designing institutions in harmony with human nature rather than in conflict with it continues to prompt discussions on how to structure society to enable humanity to thrive. In education, Rousseau's stress on cultivating children's innate talents diverges sharply from standardized curricula today that adhere to uniform benchmarks and testing. His child-centered approaches find parallels in alternative methodologies gaining popularity that favor creativity, curiosity, and flexibility. Overall, the issues Rousseau philosophized over centuries ago regarding finding alignment between human nature, society, education, and governance remain vital discussions today. While not without critique, Rousseau's innovative ideas can provide thought-provoking lenses when examining modern institutions and practices. In closing, while a product of his era, Rousseau's revolutionary ideas lit the fuse on intellectual movements that reverberated through history to the present day. His meditations on humanity's origins challenged long-accepted beliefs about human nature, education, and social dynamics. Rousseau's leading contributions were a reimagining of society as a social contract amongst people with leaders upholding their collective will, and a vision for education tailored to foster students' innate qualities rather than impose external methodologies upon them. Centuries later, Rousseau's theories still provoke important philosophical discussions and open promising avenues for formulating new models of education, social structure, and governance that better accord with human nature and potentials. The profound ideas spawned during the Enlightenment era continue to shape aspirations for greater freedom, equality, and justice in society.